Welcome to the Mystic Tye, a podcast for Freemasons. You can find us online at mystictye.com. Email me feedback, guest suggestions, and any other questions at troy@mystictye.com. The Grand Lodge of Washington State has held a lodge leadership retreat for many years. In more recent years, very worshipful brother Zane McCune has been one of the organizers. He kindly agreed to present a talk about this event at Grand Masonic Day 2026. Note, a video edition of this podcast can be found on the Mystic Tye YouTube channel.
So I'm now going to introduce our final speaker of the day. Born and raised in the picturesque landscape of the Puget Sound in Washington State, she's a beaut, Zane McCune embarked on his Masonic journey in 2007 with an earnest determination to make a lasting impact. His path to success with the fraternity is marked by milestones that reflect his passion and dedication. He has previously served the Grand Lodge of Washington in several capacities as Grand Orator, Grand Lecturer, and Deputy of the Grand Master. Zane has also served on numerous Grand Lodge committees over his years as a Freemason, but the one he is most passionate about is chairing the Leadership Training Program, which conducts a week-long seminar for lodge officers and teaches classes which are designed to help lodges succeed. In recognition of his contributions, Zane is past recipient of the prestigious Hiram Award and the Grand Master's Achievement Award. He is also a prior winner of the annual Senior Warden State Ritual Competition, which I understand is like the Olympics of Masonic ritual in Washington State, I believe. You have to just recite everything perfectly. Okay. He is a sought-after guest speaker at various lodges and Masonic conferences in the area. Zane was the keynote speaker at the Conference of Grand Masters of North America in 2024 when it was in his hometown of Seattle. And his thought-provoking presentations on Masonic education have enlightened and inspired countless brethren. Brethren, ladies and guests, please welcome Zane McCune.
I'm going to have you start writing all my introductions. That was nice. Now, a quick correction. I think you said that was a week-long seminar. I'd love it if it was a week-long seminar. It is a weekend. Yeah. So thank you very much. This is it's always fun to talk right after lunch, and I can tell we have a hardcore group here because you all came back after lunch. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you as well. So I became a Mason in 2006. I was raised in 2007. I didn't know it at the time, but I joined a lodge that had its share of struggles. And you're going up through the degrees, you're still learning how the lodge works. These things didn't set in for me for a couple of years. And on the surface, everything seemed fine, but there were cracks that were starting to show. And I had the opportunity after a couple of years, and I'm going through the line as a junior warden, to attend what was at the time called the Senior Wardens Conference. And we've later since changed that to the Leadership Retreat. But it was the first time that our lodge had participated in this event, and I was a first-time attendee. And it was eye-opening. I got to see brothers from all across the state. I got to talk to them about how they do things in their lodge, and I learned not everything's done just like we do it in our lodge. In fact, I like the way you do that there, or tell me more about how you do this. And so it was that very first moment where the wheel started to turn, like, what could we aspire to? Like, how could we set our own bar even higher? And so several years go by. I have the opportunity to join the committee in 2016, in which I readily jumped at the chance to do that. I have taught classes on lots of different subjects there, and then 2 years ago I was asked to chair that committee, which I was really happy to do because I see an opportunity to influence the up-and-coming generation of Masonic leaders in lodges in a real positive way. And it's serendipitous that we had a talk during lunch about retention and some of these other things, because I'm going to get into a little bit of that. Okay. You want to show me how to forward a slide here? Now, here we go down here. Okay. Okay. This is one of these quotes that I found during the rabbit hole of annual communications years and years ago, and I think this statement is still true. The situation in Washington is critical. Membership programs must be developed by individual lodges to overcome their decline. This is from 32 years ago. And like I said, I think it's mostly still true, because it is up to lodges to really kind of manifest their own destiny, right? But there's an opportunity for the Grand Lodge and other Masons in the state to come together to kind of pool resources, to share best practices, and bring everybody together, to do that. And I think what I like about membership program, I guess, I can think of that as a membership retention. Lodges need to develop their own ways to retain their members and overcome their decline. So this statement really still resonates with me, and I like to share it with the Masons that are attending this conference. So a little bit about the conference. This is our weekend event in March. There's an opportunity for a broad spectrum of engagement, from educational classes to discussion groups, fellowship. And our goal is to provide valuable tools and ideas and techniques for these Masons to bring back to their lodges. So not just from a personal development standpoint with respect to their office, but also with their lodge development and application directly in their lodge. This year we had 11 instructors, and I think what I like about this particular construct is we have 7 Blue Lodge Masons that are on the committee. We have 4 of our 5 principal elected officers. But it's really the 7 instructors, the Blue Lodge Masons, that are doing the heavy lifting, that are teaching the majority of the classes over the course of the weekend. We offer 34 classes in the curriculum from Saturday all day into Sunday morning. There's no way for an attendee to take all of those classes. They can select up to 10. And there is no specific track for them to take if they're a certain office. It's more of a choose your own adventure. What are the classes that resonate with them? Maybe what's going on in their lodge. So they can pick whatever of the 10 classes they like to out of the 34. And then we take all of the material from the weekend, we wrap it all up in one master file. We put it out on Grandview so that every Master Mason across the state can have access to that. I think I made mention that we originally called this the Wardens Conference, and at the time, 15 years ago, it was primarily wardens, junior wardens, and senior wardens that attended. We pivoted this several years ago to what we now call the Lodge Leadership Retreat, and we expanded the curriculum to be able to hit on all sorts of different officers. So it's open up to anybody it's open up to any Master Mason in the state, but we see a lot more participation in the remainder of the officer corps. So really at this point now, even less than half of the attendees are even wardens. There's a big chunk that are senior deacons coming up the line. Worshipful masters come. We have classes for the secretaries to take. So we have a lot of different kinds of officers that attend now. In Washington, we have 146 lodges. If we look at over a 2-year period, we have 109 lodges that attend this retreat. There's a lot of lodges that come every single year. There's some lodges that, either through schedule conflict or whatnot, they may be coming every other year. But if we look over a 2-year period, we have about a 75% participation rate. One of the stats we were able to glean this year from the information that we asked for was, we have about 70% of the lodges pay for those attendees to attend. And right now the pricing is about $500 a person. That's all inclusive, meals, hotel, everything. And in 2026, we had 154 Masons. I think this was one of the largest, and that was just attending Masons, not including staff and some of the ladies that accompany their Masons. So 154 represents about an 8% average increase year over year since 21, post-COVID. It's a lot of engagement from within the state. Talk a little bit about the 25% that don't, because we keep an eye on them too. And then the other piece of information that I think has been pretty consistent year over year is that about half the people that go are first timers, and about half the people that go have been 1 or more years. It's one of the reasons why we want to keep the curriculum rotating. Probably 15% of the curriculum changes year over year. So there's always a new class for somebody to be able to take. I can also take a look at all the information that people who've registered, and I've passed that back to the district deputies in our state too. So for the district deputies, where they have everybody, there's at least an attendee from every one of their lodges in their district, I let them know that. Or if you don't have anybody going to this event in your district, you should know that too. So I think that kind of feedback, especially if they're meeting with a lodge who's struggling and they're not plugging into lodge leadership, they can have a dialogue about that. Try to get that feedback loop. We collect quite a bit of information from a survey that we send out, and people start participating in that survey just as soon as the leadership retreat ends. We had, for the last several years, about 2/3 of the attendees who went participate in the survey. So for us, this last March, we had over 90 surveys completed, and that's a pretty solid density of the people that attended. So we can glean a lot of information from these surveys. We can see trends, we see repeat comments, we see what's working, what's not working, and this all helps us to be able to adjust either the curriculum, the class, or sometimes it's little things just about the conference to make it go a little smoother. So lots of different ways, but one of the things we can also do is because they rate every single class, we can also see what are the most well-attended classes, what are the highest rated classes. So we can glean quite a bit of information from this survey that takes about 5 minutes for them to complete. We get qualitative information, but we also get some quantitative information, and I wanted to share that because this is helpful for us from the planning committee. We ask our attendees to rate the overall experience of the conference, and this year we received 4.67 stars out of 5, which is pretty typical, somewhere around 4.6, 4.7 is what we see. But we also ask for information on whether or not they would attend next year or recommend, and that's what this NPS score, if you're familiar with NPS, it's would you recommend or would you attend again this conference? And we're posting 83 for this year. Last year we had 81, last year we had 79. So I actually was probably happy even 2 years ago when we had 79, but this conference is just getting even better and more well-refined as the years go on. So we're feeling confident that the level of engagement at the lodge level is definitely productive for those people that are attending. Besides all this numerical data that we get, we also ask for information on, what was most memorable. What other suggestions do you have for us? What kind of topics would you like to see? What kind of comments around the classes would you like to share with us? And this year we received over 200 text-related comments to that. And these are some of the real fun things to read. I mean, of course, for me, I love reading the ones that the level of thought and care that's gone in the retreat. It's easy to see, made the overall experience worthwhile. Of course, I love that. But the other things that I love to read are, Friday night, there were about 20 Masons from different lodges around different districts gathered around this patio of the hotel, and all these conversations that were happening. So, this is the meeting after the meeting after the meeting, and they're all just, sitting around. This is the stuff that, we don't teach in classes. This is just the organic element of gathering all those Masons together. So I go through all of those comments, I distill them down by topic, I share them with the committee, and we're able to not just use the numerical information, but some of this textual information to be able to refine further, every single year to make the conference a more, memorable event. $500 is a lot of money, even if the lodge is paying for it. And so it's certainly an investment in their time, and it's an investment in their lodge. So we want that to be a really high value experience for them. So I mentioned that there's 34 classes that we're teaching in one weekend with all of these instructors. I'm listing this curriculum. A lot of these classes were taught in 2026. These are some of the classes that we've taught in previous years, and they generally fall under these 5 core areas of leadership, ritual, membership engagement, management, and also best practices. And so by rotating the curriculum year over year, anybody that's coming a second time has got something new. We ask we're adding another staff member for 2027. He's got a whole other set of classes that he's going to teach. So we're just constantly rotating that around. But again, I think what I like about the conference is every single Mason can choose what works best for them in their situation. And a lot of lodges come with 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 officers, and so they might divide and conquer, or they all might go to one particular class. It's really up to them to decide, what they want to do. Now, that being said, we have all these different classes. Through the survey results, we are able to take a look at what are the most popular and what are the highest rated classes. And so for 2026, these were the 7 highest rated classes. Esoteric Nature of the Craft was a relatively new class. Our Building Light Through Leadership and the Mason as a Builder of Character. These are our 2 new leadership classes that we teach. We have ritual classes. We have a class on how to bring more Masonic education back to the lodge. I heard lots of different comments about this from the last speaker. And then another class that I teach called the Restoration of the Craft. And I think the reason that we see these as sort of the most popular, highest rated classes is because they fall into one of these 3 core areas that resonate the most with the attendees. It's leadership. It's that art of guiding brothers with wisdom, patience, and vision. It's ritual and the understanding of that ritual, so developing knowledge about it and the interpretation of that ritual. And then also just creating a lodge experience that's meaningful, that's dynamic. Those are the kinds of meetings that foster retention, not those, kind of boring business meetings. So one of the things that we've added into the classes in the last couple of years is live polling. And I want to share a little bit about why this is so impactful and dynamic to a class. I don't know if you've ever seen Poll Everywhere. This is an app that integrates right in with PowerPoint. So all the instructors, can just integrate that, right into the presentations that they have. But this live polling allows instant results to the questions that are being asked while the class is going on. And this is powerful for really kind of 2 main reasons. The first is the Mason who's answering a question on his mobile device that he's hopped into the poll to be able to answer can also see where that answer stacks up to the rest of the class. And I'll show you what an example of how powerful that might look like. But that gives him some instant feedback about maybe where he sits with his lodge and their lodge's approach to the question, and maybe where a whole other cohort of lodges is answering that question. And the second other big benefit is that the instructors get to see what's changing over time, because some of these poll questions are the same poll questions every year, and so we start to see changes and drifting from one answer to another answer, or we get to see what's not changing year over year. So live polling's become a real important element to the classes that we offer. Now, while that might not be a scientific, purely academic poll, I think it's at least worth the anecdotal benefit of seeing which way maybe trends are going, which way the winds are blowing, where there's a headwind or where there's a tailwind. I'll give you an example of a couple of these that we have. So one of the questions that we asked was about conferral teams. So when a lodge is putting together a conferral team to run a degree, are they able to confer all 3 of those degrees with all the parts being filled by just their lodge? I mean, that is the bar that they were supposed to hit when they received their charter. And some of them have drifted from that. Or can you fill all the parts without, maybe you need help with one of the lectures. Maybe you need to bring somebody that's in. Or are you one of these lodges that just needs a lot of help, either filling some of the parts or filling a lot of the parts? And so when we ask this question this year, we can see, like, first of all, a couple things pop out. That 80-20 rule. We have 20% of the lodges, they can do everything. That's fantastic to see. We have another, nearly 50%, 44% of the lodges can do a lot of their own work, and they just need to outsource like a lecture or something like that. So they're getting there. So not only do we see kind of the 80-20 rule here, but we also see like 2/3 of the lodges are doing pretty well as it relates to conferral teams, and about another 1/3 of the lodges that need some help. Let me go to the next question that we asked during one of these classes around proficiency work, and we can start to tie some of these themes together. So one of the questions that was asked was, when you expect proficiency of a candidate, are you asking for the entire, at least in our jurisdiction, we have the posting lecture. Are you required to learn the whole posting lecture or something less than the posting lecture, like the obligation only? And this was the answer that we got this year. This is one of these questions that we've been asking year over year because, that was in 2022, 4 years ago, the full posting lecture answer was only 44%. There's quite a few number of lodges now in Washington that have moved from something less than the full posting lecture to the posting lecture, but there's still about 1/3 of the lodges that don't have a very high standard when it comes to demonstrating proficiency. Well, why is that important? Because at least in our ritual, when you learn the posting lecture, you're learning lots of different parts of all these different from the conferring master to the senior deacon, you're learning quite a bit. And if your only requirement is to learn the obligation, you've missed out on this, the portion of learning additional ritual. And consequently, because the lodge doesn't have very many, because they don't set the standard very high, they don't have the talent within their lodge to be able to confer their own degrees. So now we're starting to kind of tie these two ideas together. And brothers that are in that class kind of see that happening in real time. Do you guys ever stop and ask why brothers leave Freemasonry? I know we've touched a little bit about that during the lunch discussion, but even as an officer corps in your own lodge, do you ask why brothers leave? Yes, no? Kind of, okay. I've been asking this question of the attendees for 5 years, and it always looks like this word cloud. This is one of these word clouds, so if the person who's participating in the survey types in one word, the most frequent word that's typed in is what's biggest. And boredom is always the number one answer. It has been for 5 years straight. I suspect it was that before we even brought, a survey to this. And I share this with them not as a message of doom and gloom, but really kind of flip the whole script on that and say, you can do something about that. You can opt in to have a more meaningful lodge experience. This boredom, you can solve for that. You just have a decision to make on how you implement a more meaningful lodge experience. And I think that starts to get into another topic that influences the level of boredom that they might have, or lack of positive experience in their lodge. So we talk about lodge culture. And lodge culture can mean different things to different people. But I've been to lots of different conferences, large conferences with Fortune 100 CEO speakers up on stage talking about their company, and the common thing that they all talk about, at least at some point in time during their address, is their corporate culture and how important that is for them because it orients their enterprise in a specific direction. So when I ask lodge attendees at the conference, can you describe your lodge culture? Is it well defined and embraced by all of your members? Only 10% of them could say, yes, well defined. About half of them were able to say it's somewhat defined. Okay, I can kind of accept that. But there's another third of the lodges that it's not well defined. And there's that third again. Third that aren't doing this, third that aren't, not requiring full posting lectures. There's this cohort that's starting to emerge from all of these questions that are being asked. And these are likely the struggling lodges. Now, in this particular class where we talk about lodge culture, we start to break down the characteristics of a lodge, and we can, at another point, have an argument about whether or not there's 4 characteristics or 5 or 6. But in the terms of the class that I teach, I tend to zero in on these 5 right here. And that's not to say that there's a right or wrong answer when it comes to describing your lodge culture, but let's just start off by saying, can you describe your lodge culture? Because there's some lodges that look a little more like this. Heavy social, maybe, don't focus much on Masonic education. There's probably brothers within that lodge that don't even realize how to bring Masonic education into their lodge. There's other lodges that look a little bit more like this. Maybe they're larger lodges that have a large endowment, do a lot of charity work. There's a handful of lodges that have a little more of a priority like this. And while there's no right or wrong answer, my point to all of this when we're talking about it in a class is, does the culture of your lodge match the expectation of your seekers and prospects that are knocking on the door? And are you upfront with them about what your lodge culture is like? Is it a good fit? So these are some of the themes that we talk about in these classes. And let's see. I do have that. Okay, good. I'm talking about in a second. Masonic education is probably in my mind, it's the one, and I think everybody in here, you're here for research and education lodge. Education probably sits near and dear to your heart, but there are the lodges that are really struggling. At least in Washington, there's a third of the lodges that are really struggling with bringing Masonic education to their lodge. And so when I asked the question, and I think even Ken was with me when we asked this question, what was your lodge's response when the suggestion was made to bring more Masonic education to the lodge? And the number one answer, the reason that they couldn't do that is because of time. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. You can just stay there a little bit longer. This is like you can, but it was interesting that boredom is the number one answer why people leave Freemasonry, and time is the reason that they don't have more Masonic education in our lodge. That I really want Masons to walk away from these classes, from this retreat, thinking about these ideas and talk about them, in their officer corps. This is another one of these survey type things that they can take in class. So we asked them last year, can you rank your priorities? Because if you want to know the answer to what is the most important thing to your lodge, just ask them, what do you spend the most amount of time on? That's your priority. That's where you've dedicated most of the time to. So I asked the whole room full of Masons, rank your priorities for me. And this is what last year's result looked like. It wasn't super surprising. Social activities are always at the top of the list. There's nothing wrong with social activities. But if most of the Masons are leaving because they're bored, is social activities really the cure to that answer? When we asked that question this year, We saw that Masonic education had moved up number 2. I think that that's a positive step that we're seeing. I say esoteric discussion, you want to call that philosophical discussion, just deeper discussion around topics that relate to Freemasonry. But we're starting to see those 2 characteristics of a lodge move up in priority, even just from last year. So that was actually pretty positive to see. This is another one of those things I think that's trending in the right direction too. So we asked about, does your lodge even have the capability of providing Masonic education in lodge? I mean, really every lodge should be answering yes, but when I asked that question, only 50% of them said, I'm confident that my lodge has the internal resources to provide their own Masonic education. So maybe they have a lodge education officer, maybe they have a core group of guys that are very much into making sure that that's the experience. But there was another, cohort of lodges that said they needed a lot of help in this area. So again, that helps us kind of think about what kind of classes we might want to offer next year, which I suspect is why that esoteric nature of the craft class was probably the most popular class, even though it's not really like a true leadership, type of a class. When I asked this question just 2 years ago, there were 42% of the lodges that said that they could. So 42% improvement to 50%, not a huge increase, but it's trending in the right direction, and I'm really excited to see that. I think there's been a large attitude shift from the Masons that I meet with, and I've met with lots now over the 10, 11 years I've been an instructor at the retreat. There's been a pretty monumental shift in the attitude around retention. I'm glad that's already come up today too, because there was this myth that was perpetuated kind of coming out of the 90s, where we were losing more of our brothers to the Celestial Lodge than were joining the craft. And there wasn't, we were fighting that downhill slope. You guys have all seen that downward slope since 1959. But I think that has changed quite a bit probably in the last 7 or 8 years. And I think the Masons, and at least my jurisdiction I talked to, are starting to wake up to that we can do something about the numbers of Masons that are participating in lodge, but it's more about retention than it is this cascading fall of some of our brethren as they enter the Celestial Lodge. And I think there's a big wake up that Masons are seeing when they come to the lodge leadership. They talk about this, and I encourage them to ask these 2 questions when they go back to their lodge. What are men seeking in Freemasonry? What are they seeking? Why do they want to even go down this road? You should be asking them that question. And you should also be setting some upfront expectations with them. Because when you have expectations meeting reality, then those brothers joining the lodge, those brothers are fulfilled. And that's ultimately retention. And then the other question I encourage them to ask is, what value does your lodge offer? I mean, every corporation in America is asking, what value does our company offer to its customer? And I know we're not a for-profit organization, but the question is still valid. What value do you bring? I mean, men today are competing with their time with all sorts of other things, not the least of which is, the time that they spend down at the lodge. And so is that experience that they're having down there, is that a quality experience? And if it is, they're going to be more engaged. And again, if they're more engaged, that's what leads to retention. So I'm excited to see that there's this attitude shift among the brothers that come to lodge leadership, that they can actually do something about these falling numbers now. This is such an odd topic. Everything is always about like more Masons. And even the Grand Lodge officers are like, well, how many people have you petitioned? And I think I heard earlier in the comment, like, if you have 7 new Masons in your lodge, and maybe the problems that kind of come along with that. because it's all, for a lot of people, it seems to always be about the numbers. But growth, I look at as more of a byproduct of having a really quality Masonic experience at Lodge. The growth is going to come. And I'd trade 1 or 2 new members every year who are going to stick around than initiating 7 or 8 guys in a particular year and 5 of them flake off and don't come back. Sustainable growth is really a byproduct. It's not what we're chasing, it's what happens to our lodge when we deserve it, when we create that quality experience, quality Masonic experience, providing value to members, and communicating that lodge culture effectively to the seekers who are knocking on the door of our lodges, whatever your lodge culture may be. So I want to share a couple more slides before I wrap up. I think we're seeing some, success is such a nuanced idea down at the lodge level, but I think there are some things that we can see at the state level in the aggregate. And this was something we saw in 2025 in Washington, where the NPD and demit rate declined below its historical average for like the very first time. NPD meaning non-payment of dues. So these are the brothers that just walk in the West Gate and walk right back out. And we saw that number decline for the first time since Alaska broke off and became its own Grand Lodge. So that was pretty cool to see. Now, I think to some extent it's because we're talking about these topics at lodge leadership, and then they're also talking amongst themselves as well. When we see lodges just focusing much more on the idea of retention than simply how can we go out and have a membership drive and just try to open up the floodgate and bring a bunch of new members in. So some lodges are doing this really well. There's clearly still a cohort of lodges that are struggling with these ideas. And one of our responses to that was to launch a scholarship program. So we ran this through Washington Masonic Charities, lodge scholarship for an attendee to go, particularly if they haven't been before. We had 9% of the attendees received a scholarship, so that we actually saw like even a bump just from the scholarship program, which was really exciting to see. And I had an opportunity to talk to some of these brothers, and it really resonated with me because there was a brother who their lodge had never participated in the leadership retreat. They were a very first time attendee, and you could just see like, I just had no idea. And it was, I got fired up just talking to these guys because I remember what that was like, for me 15 years ago when I, attended the very first one. There was a lot of discussion about hosting like a regional one-day workshop, and that's the next evolution for us. So we'll have the annual retreat in March, and then we'll selectively place a one-day event around the state. So those are things that we're working on. Just like today's technology support, we had our technology committee for the first time show up to the leadership retreat to video record. I think we had 8 classes recorded. Part of that was for posterity. Some of these guys are also going to be rolling off the committee at some point in time, but it also allowed us to be able to preserve some of these classes and open up some slots for other classes to be able to rotate it in. So again, we can constantly change the curriculum. So those are some of the things that we're working on for the future. Our event next year is March 19th through 2027. If you guys are interested in coming, if you want to, I think I've talked to a couple people already about our leadership program while I was up here today, but you're more than welcome to attend and see what this is like. If I can answer any questions, I'm more than happy to. Here's my contact information, and appreciate the opportunity to address you today. Thank you very much.
Well, we got time for a few questions before we're going to take a break. Just before we do, it's come to my attention that there's a few other folks here from outside the province, so I just want to take a moment and thank those people who have come here. Who here is not from British Columbia? You stand up and just say where you're from. Everett, Washington. Yeah.
Washington State. Longview Lodge, Washington State.
Longview Lodge.
Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake City. Hey. Fantastic. So I do that both to acknowledge you and thank you for coming up here and spending time with us, and I hope you found the day valuable. I also do it to shame the brethren in North Vancouver and Burnaby who are watching at home right now, instead of coming here in person. So thank you for that, Zane. That is great. Maybe I missed it in one of the earlier slides, but how long have these retreats been going on for now?
I think we launched this in 2004 as the Organist Conference.
Excellent. And so over the years, it sounds like they've evolved, and you've been like getting feedback. I'm wondering, how much of this is an initiative from within Grand Lodge, and how much of it is guys excited about leadership in general who are just taking time outside of Grand? Is this a very formal thing that's embedded within Grand Lodge?
Okay, that's a great question. So we consider this the Deputy Grand Master's event. The Grand Master's generally not at this event. And like I mentioned, the 4 of the 5 Grand Lodge officers are there, but they do not teach a majority of the classes. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that the classes are, if they feel like this information that's being shared with other Blue Lodge Masons. I mean, they are on a Grand Lodge committee, but we try to keep that spirit, if you will, as opposed to the Grand Lodge saying, you should do it like this. And I think we try to keep it more of like, here's a way that you can do it that might work. It's worked in my experience, might work for you if you're struggling in your lodge.
And I'm curious, is it open to brethren from outside the jurisdiction or just in Washington?
Well, it's certainly not closed. We'd love to have people from outside the jurisdiction. I think, we've got a little bit of room for a capacity increase. So there's nothing that keeps it from, being offered outside the jurisdiction.
I'm curious, we've had over the years here in our grand jurisdiction, we've had different types of leadership, summits or retreats and things over the years. And it seems that sometimes there's Masons who kind of roll their eyes a little bit or turn their nose up and just think, oh, well, that's just, what are we becoming, some corporate management retreat? I thought we were in an ancient esoteric brotherhood here. I'm wondering if you ever encounter any types of tensions, in your jurisdiction around the purpose of this and how it fits in Freemasonry.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So when I get asked a question like this is how maybe this is my perspective, but I think of the lodge experience as being like an operating system, just like an operating system on your phone. The operating system itself needs to be the best that it possibly can be, but it is not the end-all thing that we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to do is push content through the operating system. What is that content? All of these Masonic education topics, Freemasonry with a big F, not Freemasonry with a little f. So my response to that is, why not, while you're pushing content through your lodge, also build the best lodge that you possibly can? So here's all these different kinds of ideas on how to improve your lodge experience. Is that?
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm curious too, on that note, have you ever seen a lodge excel at the management/business side of things that didn't also excel at ritual?
Probably not. It's like the thing that question reminds me of most of is when I hear people sort of talk about, really great ritualists who just seem to parrot ritual and don't really understand it. I'm like, yeah, that person doesn't exist. They know their ritual really well. It's because they've studied that ritual. It's not like they don't have any idea what they're talking about. And so I do think that the lodges that are, there was a class where we spent a lot of time talking about dues. There was a full analysis done on every single lodge in Washington State and what their due structure were. And that was pretty eye-opening too. So there's lodges, certainly, I don't think that, the lodges that are fine with money are the ones that are
struggling in other areas, but that might not necessarily be true. It could be lodges that have a lot of money but have sort of lost their focus on, what the lodge experience should really be all about.
I'm curious, and for those who might have questions from the audience, we will have a microphone out in I don't want to hog the Q&A here, but I'm curious about that last point, because you mentioned one of the things that you have started to talk about at these retreats is this idea of being more cognizant of lodge culture. Like, what's the culture of your lodge? And I know, and Ken Lane and Ken from Seattle, we've talked about this for years and years, and I actually wrote a little bit about this in an article in Journal of the Masonic Society, I think it was in, and because I think this is an undervalued sort of, it's an undervalued piece of critical self-awareness about lodges and how we ensure the right guy is getting to the right lodge. Because if you're looking for a more, spiritual, more, intellectual, philosophical experience, and you're joining the lodge that, as Ken would occasionally say, flips pancakes at the side of the highway and raises money for, that you're focused on charity, then there's a misalignment, right? But if you want to be the guy that's raising money for youth programs and you want to be out there doing that stuff, and you end up in the lodge that's, doing, heavy duty attention to ritual and more esoteric discussions, again, that's a misalignment. So what are you doing in Washington to try and be more critically self-aware of that lodge culture piece? And are you trying to line that up with where guys are directed to when they're knocking on the door?
Yeah, I think that's a very regional kind of, that's different depending on the region of Washington, because we have some very rural areas of Washington where there might not be another lodge for, 15, 20 miles or more, several cities away. We're on the, Ken's Lodge is up in Seattle. I'm down in the South Puget Sound, and there's, lodges there's a handful of lodges within 15 minutes. And so like our district prospect manager will meet with a prospective candidate or prospective seeker before he's assigned a particular lodge. And it's that district manager that knows enough about each one of the lodges in their district that can help kind of point them in the right direction. And if they're not doing that, they're hearing that from me when they go to lodge leadership, because at the end of the day, be able to describe the lodge, your lodge culture, your priorities, what do you focus on, and is that matching these, guys that are interested in joining the craft? Because, they're out there. They're interested, but I think they're going to have a better experience if they line up with a lodge that best fits their needs. Like picking a college, right? You go to all these different colleges. I want to go to that one, or picking a church, or whatever kind of organization, something like that. So I think this reminds me of a question that I asked, at least in one of the classes that I teach at the leadership retreat, is what's the one thing that a Masonic lodge can provide to its members that they can't get anywhere else? What is that one secret weapon that we have? What's that one thing that no one else can replicate? No, it's not Scotch. It's a ritual. It's Masonic education. Nobody can get that anywhere else. And I really think that is kind of like the secret sauce to a really great lodge experience. It addresses the number one reason why why brothers leave Freemasonry: boredom. And all you need to do is just overcome the time issue, whatever that really is. So that means, truncating the business aspect of a lodge meeting down to just the bare bone minimum, and focusing more on the original intent why we're all there. Move the temple board business into the temple board meeting. Don't bog down the lodge meeting with all these non-essential things. Get through it as quickly as you can and prioritize Masonic education in the lodge. I think actually that will solve a lot of the ailments in the lodges that are experiencing. In the Masonic education class that I teach, that can kind of look like one of two different things. And if you don't have the resource within your own lodge to deliver it, it doesn't obviate the need of the worshipful master to bring that to the meeting. At least in our jurisdiction, that's one of the 15 obligations that a worshipful master makes when he's installed as worshipful master, is to bring Masonic education lodge. We worded it a little bit differently. So outsource it. So we launched in Washington, we launched the Masonic Speakers Bureau. So bring in a speaker from another lodge or from, somewhere else in the state to speak on Masonic topics until your lodge has the capacity to deliver that yourself. How can you do that? Well, why not, instead of just making a proficiency requirement for an entered apprentice, just learning the posting lecture, but why not have them talk about something that they learned about in the entered apprentice degree and deliver a 5-minute paper, in their lodge? It's that, even just that first 5 minutes, it gets them out of their comfort zone, it puts them up in front of the lodge, and that Mason who's delivering a 5-minute paper today, he's the one that's going to deliver a 30-minute presentation, 2 years from now. And start to cultivate that whole idea of just, finding ways to bring Masonic education into your lodge. You can outsource it for a little while until you can do it all yourselves. Half the lodges in our state right now are able to do that themselves.
What fosters a strong sense of belongingness amongst members?
I think that's a really good question. I think you need a good, diverse group of guys that have different strengths that they can bring to the overall lodge experience. There's things that I'm, good at, but there's also some things that I'm not great at, and I'm glad I've got some lodge brothers who can, be the point on something like that. But I think when you've had first of all, I think this kind of goes to the culture comment from earlier. What is your lodge culture? What is your lodge all about? And being able to identify that so everybody can kind of orient their belonging to the lodge around that. So, whatever it is for your lodge, what is it that you prioritize, and what are you guys really good at?
Are there ever any discussions on lodges amalgamating and how they could do that to strengthen themselves to be able to move forward?
We did hold, I'll just answer that. We going back almost 15 years ago, held an event here at the old VMC where we had brethren from Maple Leaf and Park Lodge, which is now Heritage Lodge, combined again. We actually walked through what a good consolidation process looks like. I don't know how often that's been revisited, but we did do that when discussions were had back then about lodges struggling and how difficult it was for some of them to approach that. So best practices around amalgamation and consolidation. But Zane, be curious to hear what you've been doing in Washington. I think that content still exists. If Trevor could dig it up, probably somewhere on the website.
I think there were 2 lodges in our district that merged, and they both actually met in the same building. And I think a lot of people looked at that as kind of maybe a little bit of a no-brainer. Together they're stronger, and honestly they were all like plural members of each other anyway, so I think that was maybe not the best case example. Probably where I would take that back is to, like, in my professional career I work with a lot of financial institutions. There's a lot of merger and acquisition activity in that field, and maybe I'll take a lesson from that, and maybe there's something that can be gleaned from that. So when 2 companies come together in a merger, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. The systems may not talk to each other. There might be problems in the conversion. All of that technology and all of that infrastructure, that can get all worked out at the end. But the thing that kind of makes it more difficult is those 2 different corporate cultures coming together, and do they mesh with one another? Because if they do, that's when that combined company is stronger than it was before. And I've seen that happen in lots of different M&A situations where they didn't mesh with one another, and they weren't better off, because of the merger. I would suspect that just bringing any 2 organizations together, I think you need to have that type of marriage in order for it to work real well. Hopefully that gets to some of your question there.
Thank you.
Yep.
We had a pretty good process recently in District 13 where University Lodge handed in its charter. And before we did so, we looked at consolidating and we explored a couple different lodges. And so we went through a process of joint conferrals of degrees with Mount Hermon Lodge and with Acacia Lodge. We had a couple of meetings where we discussed discussed what are we going to do with the money we have in the bank. And we talked about the different sort of things that we would like to support if we're going to roll up the lodge, and that included, giving some money to the new lodges that eventually most of the brethren from university joined Acacia Lodge, and so some money came over to Acacia to help with putting that to work. Some money went to Grand Lodge, to a building fund that we cared about, issues around buildings. Some Masonic education, I think, to the library to support some of the work that Trevor's doing, and even Mount Hermon Lodge got a little bit. Some brethren joined, but even just as a courtesy to say thank you for the process of going with us, of jointly conferring these degrees and everything else. And I feel like the brethren, and I mean, there's brethren from Acacia Lodge here today. I feel like the brethren, by and large, felt that it was a transparent process, and like we were very upfront about we want to explore this, and in the end, from my perspective, I think it worked out well. Acacia got a big influx of new members. Mount Hermon, the guys that felt that the culture of the lodge there was more what they were looking for. Came over, and everyone's still friends. So that was another good recent example. If there's one best practice that I could name in all that, it's don't put it off and don't rush it. I think being proactive about it and saying, let's not get to the point where we don't think we can open the lodge, or where we really think that we're not going to be able to make it for another year or two. Look out 2 or 3 years and think, what does a good process look like to navigate this, that all the brethren feel nothing's being forced on them, nothing's being rushed, we're transparent about what's happening.
The question is about retention, specifically about the 2 slides you put up, one of which was on the why people leave. I think the one was boredom, and the other one was why people stay. I think that was on social. So the question is a practical one about what have you seen implemented by lodges that enhance retention, and have you seen anyone do it effectively, and what has the result been?
Yeah. Well, I like to get that conversation going, which is why I asked the question, why do brothers leave? And I know that they're going to answer boredom, because it's been boredom for the last 5 years straight. We talk about what makes a lodge meeting boring. And again, as long as you can get to the root of the problem and everybody agrees that we can do something about that, you have an opportunity to change that. So in some of those classes, we offer specific examples around, well, what can you do to reduce the amount of time on just the business aspect of a lodge meeting? And there's just necessary business we have to go through, but how can you speed things up and just truncate down to the essence of the business side and create more time? So the lodges, I have lodges in my district. Frankly, I'll sound a little bit like a broken record, but the thing that changed their approach the most was they launched a whole new education series, for the entire year. They lined up all their speakers well in advance, and it was just in this particular lodge. The example was they were talking about they were addressing the 7 liberal arts. So they had a speaker coming in, to talk about each one of those 7 arts and sciences, and so they put that out there. They oriented their whole lodge meetings around that. They brought, attracted people from, other lodges to come in and listen to that. So that's, that's an example that kind of pops up to mind. Yeah. And the other thing that I like to make sure that they're addressing is, again, what is it that your lodge does that brings value to your members? And what is what are the priorities of your lodge? And are you talking about those things with the guys that are knocking on the door and, interested in Freemasonry? Because they all have a position of what they think Freemasonry might be when they first knock. And then their experience, it needs to be tangible to what those lodges actually prioritize. What is important to this particular lodge? I know in our lodge, we ask guys to go around and meet with 2 or 3 other lodges in the area to make sure that they know for sure we're the right fit for them. That's just another one of the steps that we go through.
Okay, everyone. Again, I want to thank Zane McCune, everyone, for an excellent talk. Thank you very much, Zane. Thank you. And I also want to thank Mike Bain, who just somehow ended up being our microphone runner for questions. So thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening today. You can support the show by liking, sharing, and subscribing on your favorite podcast syndicator. Even more helpful, leave us a review. We are looking to create a directory of Freemasonic events and publications. If you are aware of something coming up, please let me know by email. In the meantime, check out the Masonic Conference's website at masonicconferences.com. Esotericism in Freemasonry Conference will be held on Saturday, September 19th. Our keynote speaker will be Lon Milo DuQuette, author of The Tarot Architect. Doug Russell and Ike Baker will also be speaking. Get your tickets in advance by RSVP to esotericmasonry@gmail.com. For other events, check out our calendar at mystictye.com and don't forget to sign up for our newsletter while you are there. Graphics and web hosting are by Art Szabo Creative. A special thanks to Organist for our theme music. Happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.